The Art of Letting Go. Chapter 1. The Decision. Martin Ellis had lived in the same house for more than 40 years. It was a modest, two-story home with ivy climbing the brick walls and a small garden that had once been full of roses. The house stood quietly on the edge of Bath, a city known for its old stone buildings and peaceful streets. Martin's home had once been full of life. Now it was quiet. Too quiet. He was 76 years old, retired and alone. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years earlier after a long illness. Since then, Martin had kept everything just as it was. Her books still sat on the shelf in the living room. Her coat still hung by the door. Her teacup, with a small chip on the rim, still rested on the kitchen counter. He had not moved these things. He had not touched them. He had simply lived around them. Martin was a quiet man. He had spent most of his life teaching history at a local school. He loved facts, dates, and stories from the past. He believed that every object had a story, and every story had a lesson. But in recent years, he had stopped telling stories. He had stopped writing in his journal. He had stopped inviting people over. The silence in the house had grown heavier, like dust settling on forgotten furniture. One morning in early spring, Martin sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The sun came through the window, lighting up the dust in the air. He looked around the room and saw the same things he saw every day. The same photos on the wall. The same books on the shelf. The same clock ticking slowly. And something inside him shifted. He realized that the house was full of memories, but it was no longer full of life. He had been holding on to things, not because he needed them, but because he was afraid to let them go. He had kept every letter, every gift, every small item that reminded him of Margaret, of their son, of their shared years. But now, he felt ready. Not to forget, but to move forward. Martin stood up and walked to the hallway. He opened the closet and looked at the boxes stacked inside. Some were labeled, some were not. He pulled out one box and opened it. Inside were old postcards, birthday cards, and a pair of gloves. He smiled softly. He remembered the day Margaret had worn those gloves to a winter concert. He remembered how she had laughed when she lost one in the snow. He didn't cry. He didn't feel sad. He felt calm. That afternoon, Martin made a decision. He would hold a yard sale. He would sort through the items in the house and choose what to keep and what to release. He didn't want to throw things away. He wanted them to find new homes, new hands, new stories. He believed that objects could carry memory, but they could also carry hope. He wrote a small sign and placed it in the window. Yard sale this Saturday. He didn't expect many people to come. He didn't care about money. He cared about letting go. That evening, Martin sat in his study and made a list. He wrote down the rooms he would go through. He wrote down the boxes he would open. He wrote down the items he would keep. A few things were too precious to part with: Margaret's wedding ring, a photo of their son as a baby, a book she had given him on their anniversary. But most things, he realized, were ready to move on. The decision was not easy, but it was clear. Martin didn't want to live in a museum of his own life. He wanted to live in the present, with space to breathe and room to grow. He wanted to remember, but he also wanted to change. And so, the quiet man in the quiet house began a quiet journey. Not away from memory, but toward peace. Toward light. Toward the art of letting go. Chapter 2. Preparation. Martin Ellis woke early the next morning. The sky outside was pale and quiet, and the garden was still wet from the night's rain. He made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the list he had written the night before. It was short but clear. He had decided to go room by room, box by box, and choose what to keep and what to let go. It was not just a task. It was a personal journey. He started in the living room. The shelves were full of books, many of them history volumes he had used during his teaching years. Some were marked with notes in the margins, others had bookmarks left by Margaret. He touched the covers gently. He remembered the evenings they spent reading together, each in a different chair, sharing quiet thoughts. He chose a few books to keep, ones that still spoke to him, and placed the rest in a box labeled Sale. Next, he opened a drawer near the fireplace. Inside were old birthday cards, postcards from holidays, and small souvenirs. A wooden keychain from Paris, a pebble from Cornwall, a ticket stub from a concert they had attended in 1978. Each item brought back a moment. Martin paused often, letting the memories rise and settle. He smiled at some, felt a small ache at others. But he kept going. In the hallway closet, he found Margaret's coats and scarves. He touched the fabric, remembering how she used to wrap the blue scarf around her neck on cold mornings. He held it for a long time before placing it gently in the keep pile. Some coats were worn and faded. He folded them neatly and added them to the sale box. He didn't rush. He moved slowly, with care. The bedroom was harder. It still felt like hers. The drawers held her jewelry, her notebooks, and a small box of letters. Martin sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box. The letters were written in her handwriting, soft and flowing. Some were addressed to him, others were notes she had written to herself. He read a few, feeling her voice in the words. He decided to keep the box. It was not something to sell. It was something to treasure. In the attic, he found old toys from his son's childhood. A wooden train, a stuffed bear, a puzzle with missing pieces. He remembered building tracks on the floor, watching his son laugh and play. He picked up a small car and turned it in his hand. It was scratched and faded, but still strong. He placed it in the keep pile, thinking maybe one day his grandson would play with it. Martin worked through the house over several days. He didn't try to finish quickly. He gave each item attention. He let the memories come and go. He didn't push them away. He welcomed them, then gently placed them aside. He understood that letting go was not about forgetting. It was about making space, for peace, for change, for something new. He filled boxes with books, dishes, clothes, and decorations. He labeled each one carefully. He cleaned the items, polished the surfaces, and folded the fabrics. He wanted them to be ready for new homes. He believed that every object had a story, and every story deserved to continue. By the end of the week, the house looked different. It was still familiar, but lighter. The shelves were not empty, but they were no longer crowded. The rooms felt more open. Martin felt a quiet sense of progress. He had not erased the past. He had honored it. And now, he was ready to share it. He placed the boxes in the hallway, stacked neatly and waiting. The yard sale was only a few days away. Martin didn't know who would come or what they would take. But he knew he had done something important. He had taken a step toward healing. He had practiced the art of letting go. And in the quiet of his home, surrounded by memories and space, Martin felt something new, a soft hope, like morning light through a clean window. Chapter 3. The First Day. Saturday morning arrived with soft light and a cool breeze. Martin Ellis stood in his garden, surrounded by boxes, tables, and neatly arranged items. He had spent the last few days preparing everything with care. Each object had been cleaned, labeled, and placed where it could be seen easily. The garden, once quiet and private, now looked like a small market. Martin felt a mix of nervousness and calm. He didn't know who would come, but he was ready. He wore a simple sweater and comfortable shoes. His hands were steady, though his heart beat a little faster than usual. He had placed a small sign near the gate, "Yard sale, all welcome." He didn't expect a crowd. He didn't expect anything, really. He just wanted to let go, one piece at a time. By mid-morning, the first visitors arrived. A young couple with a baby stroller walked in, smiling politely. They looked at the books and picked up a few old novels. Martin watched them from a distance. He didn't speak unless someone asked. He didn't try to sell anything. He simply observed. Soon, more people came. Neighbors he hadn't seen in years, students from the nearby college, older women with shopping bags, and children with curious eyes. The garden filled with quiet voices and slow footsteps. People touched the objects gently, as if they knew they were more than things. Martin noticed how some items attracted attention not because they were useful, but because they felt familiar. A young woman picked up an old lamp with a green shade. She held it for a long time, then smiled softly. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's house. Martin nodded and let her take it. He didn't ask for much. He believed that if something found the right person, that was enough. A boy, no older than 7, found a wooden toy car near the edge of the table. It was scratched and faded, but still strong. He rolled it across the table, laughing quietly. Martin remembered having a similar car when he was a child. He watched the boy and felt a warm memory rise inside him. The boy's mother asked for the price, and Martin said it was free. The boy's smile was the only payment he needed. Throughout the day, Martin saw how people connected with the objects. A woman chose a set of teacups because they reminded her of her mother's kitchen. A man picked up a small clock and said it looked like the one his father used to fix. A student bought a stack of old history books, excited to read them. Martin felt something shift inside him. He had expected to feel loss, but instead he felt peace. He realized that the sale was not just about clearing space. It was about sharing stories. Each item carried a piece of his life, and now those pieces were moving into new homes. He didn't feel empty. He felt lighter. He saw how memory could travel, how it could live in someone else's hands. As the sun began to set, the garden grew quiet again. Most of the items were gone. Only a few boxes remained. Martin sat on a chair near the gate, watching the sky turn orange. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. He had done something important. He had opened his heart, and people had responded with kindness. That night, Martin walked through his house. The rooms looked different. There was more space, more light. He didn't feel lonely. He felt connected. The first day of the sale had shown him that letting go was not the end. It was a beginning. It was a way to share, to remember, and to move forward. And in the quiet of the evening, Martin Ellis smiled. He had taken the first step. He had learned that even small actions could carry great meaning. He had practiced the art of letting go, and he was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 4. A Hidden Treasure. The morning after the first day of the yard sale, Martin Ellis felt both tired and calm. The garden was quiet again, and the boxes that remained were fewer than before. He had watched many of his belongings find new homes, and he had seen how people connected with the objects not just through need, but through memory. That gave him comfort. But he knew there were still things to sort through. He went back inside and walked to the study. It was the smallest room in the house, filled with papers, folders, and old boxes stacked neatly in the corner. Martin had not touched these boxes in years. They were part of the past he had avoided, not because he didn't care, but because he wasn't ready. Now, something inside him said it was time. He opened one of the boxes slowly. Inside were old photographs, letters, and notebooks. He recognized most of them, cards from friends, school papers, and small notes from his son. But at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a soft cloth, was a book he had never seen before. It was a journal, bound in faded leather, with a small ribbon tucked between the pages. He opened it carefully and saw Margaret's handwriting. Martin froze for a moment. He hadn't known she kept a journal. They had shared so much during their life together, but this was something private, something she had never mentioned. He turned the pages slowly. The writing was gentle and thoughtful. It was full of her feelings, her thoughts, and her memories. Some entries were short, others long. Some were written during quiet mornings, others during difficult days. He read about the early years of their marriage, about the joy of raising their son, about her love for the garden and the books they read together. He read about her worries, her hopes, and her quiet strength. There were pages where she wrote about him, his kindness, his silence, his way of listening without speaking. Martin felt tears rise in his eyes. He had never seen her words like this before. They were honest, tender, and full of life. One entry spoke about a day when Martin had come home tired from work. Margaret had written how she watched him sit in his chair, close his eyes, and breathe deeply. She had written that she felt lucky to share that silence with him. Another entry described a walk they had taken in the rain, how they didn't speak, but held hands the whole way. Martin remembered that day. He hadn't known it meant so much to her. He read for hours, stopping only to wipe his eyes or take a deep breath. The journal was not just a book. It was a window into her heart. It showed him parts of her he had missed, even while living beside her. It reminded him that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, written in small words on soft pages. Martin didn't put the journal in the sail. He placed it gently on his desk, beside a photo of Margaret. He knew this was something to keep. Not because it was valuable in money, but because it was valuable in meaning. It was a hidden treasure, one that had waited patiently to be found. That evening, Martin sat in his chair and thought about the journal. He realized how important it is to listen, not just with ears, but with attention. He had loved Margaret deeply, but there were things he hadn't asked, moments he hadn't noticed. The journal didn't make him feel guilty. It made him feel grateful. Grateful that she had written, and grateful that he had found it. He decided to write again. He took out his own notebook and began to write about the sale, about the people who came, and about the memories that returned with each item. He wrote about the journal and what it had taught him. He didn't try to be perfect. He just wanted to remember. Martin understood now that letting go is not only about objects. It is also about opening space inside yourself, for new feelings, new understanding, and new peace. The journal had given him that. It had reminded him that love continues, even after goodbye. And in the quiet of the study, surrounded by pages and memories, Martin Ellis felt something rare and beautiful. He felt close to Margaret again, not through things, but through words. Through the hidden treasure she had left behind. Chapter 5. A Visit. The second day of the yard sale began with soft clouds and a light breeze. Martin Ellis stood in his garden again, surrounded by the remaining boxes and items. The first day had gone well. Many objects had found new homes, and Martin had felt a quiet sense of peace. He had seen how memories could be shared, how stories could travel. Now, he was ready to continue. He had placed a few more things on the table, some old maps, a small globe, and a collection of postcards from different countries. These were pieces from his years as a history teacher, reminders of lessons taught and places studied. He didn't expect anyone to be interested in them, but he wanted to offer them anyway. Late in the morning, a man walked through the garden gate. He was in his 40s, tall, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. He looked around slowly, then stopped when he saw Martin. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he smiled and nodded. Martin nodded back, unsure if he recognized him. The man walked over to the table with the maps and picked one up. It was an old map of Europe, marked with small notes in pencil. He turned to Martin and said that he remembered this map. He said he had seen it in a classroom many years ago. Martin looked at him more closely. The face was older now, but the eyes were familiar. The man said his name was Daniel. He had been one of Martin's students more than 25 years ago. He had sat in the back row, quiet but curious. He had loved history, especially the stories behind the facts. Martin remembered him now. He had been the kind of student who listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. Daniel said that Martin's lessons had stayed with him. He said that Martin had taught him more than dates and names. He had taught him how to think, how to ask questions, how to see the world with care. He said that those lessons had helped him in life, in work, and in raising his own children. Martin was quiet. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't thought his teaching had left such a mark. They talked for a while, standing near the table. Daniel asked about the sale, about the items, about the memories. Martin shared a few stories, simple and honest. He spoke about Margaret, about the journal, about the decision to let go. Daniel listened with respect. He said that letting go was not easy, but it was brave. Martin felt something shift inside him. He had spent years thinking that his past was behind him, that his work had ended when he retired. But now he saw that it had continued. It had lived on in others, in quiet ways he hadn't known. That gave him strength. It reminded him that even small actions could matter. Before leaving, Daniel picked up the globe and asked if he could buy it. Martin smiled and said yes. He wrapped it carefully and handed it to him. Daniel thanked him, not just for the globe, but for everything. Martin watched him walk away, feeling a deep sense of connection. That afternoon, Martin sat in his study and looked at the journal again. He thought about the visit, about the words, about the unexpected gift of being remembered. He realized that the yard sale was not just about clearing space. It was about opening doors, to memory, to meaning, to others. He understood now that the past doesn't disappear. It lives in people, in stories, in quiet moments. And sometimes it returns when you least expect it, bringing light and strength. Martin Ellis felt grateful. He had let go of many things, but he had gained something too. He had seen that his life had touched others. He had seen that his story was still being told. And in the quiet of the evening, he smiled. The visit had reminded him that letting go is not the end. It is part of the journey. It is part of the art of living. Chapter 6. The Last Box. The yard sale was almost over. Most of the boxes were gone, and the garden looked quiet again. The tables were nearly empty, and the few remaining items sat in the soft afternoon light. Martin Ellis stood near the back door, looking at one last box. It was smaller than the others, plain and unmarked. He had saved it for the end, not because he forgot it, but because he knew it would be the hardest. He carried the box to the bench in the garden and sat down slowly. The air was cool, and the sky was pale blue. Birds sang in the trees, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed from the street. Martin opened the box gently, as if it might break. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years. Things he had kept not for use, but for memory. The first item was Margaret's watch. It was silver, with a thin band and a small scratch on the glass. She had worn it every day, even when it stopped working. Martin turned it in his hand, remembering how she used to check the time before leaving for the shop or meeting a friend. The watch didn't tick anymore, but it still held her rhythm. Next was her favorite scarf. It was soft, blue, and slightly faded. She had worn it on walks, on cold mornings, and even inside the house when she felt chilly. Martin held it to his face and closed his eyes. The scent was gone, but the feeling remained. It was like holding a piece of her presence, something warm and familiar. Then he found a note. It was written in her handwriting, simple and clear. It was not a letter, just a short message she had left for him one morning. Gone to the shop. Back soon. Love you. Martin had kept it without thinking. Now it felt like a whisper from the past. He read it again and again, as if the words could bring her back. There were other small things in the box. A ring she wore on holidays, a photo of them in the garden, a pressed flower from their anniversary. Each item was quiet, but full of meaning. Martin didn't cry. He just sat there, holding the memories, letting them speak. He realized that this box was different. It wasn't about clearing space. It was about facing what mattered most. These items were anchors. They had kept him steady through grief, through silence, through change. They had reminded him of love, of connection, of the life they had built together. But now, something inside him had shifted. He didn't feel the same weight. He didn't feel trapped by the past. He felt ready, not to forget, but to carry the memories in a new way. He understood that even anchors can be lifted when the time is right. Martin didn't put these items in the sale. He placed them back in the box, carefully and with respect. He carried the box inside and put it on a shelf in his study. Not hidden, not locked away, just there, where he could see it when he needed to. That evening, he sat at his desk and wrote in his notebook. He wrote about the box, about the scarf, about the note. He wrote about how love stays, even when people go. He didn't try to explain everything. He just wanted to remember. Martin Ellis had let go of many things. He had shared his past with strangers, with neighbors, with old students. He had opened his heart and found peace. But he had also learned that some things are meant to stay. Not to hold us back, but to remind us who we are. And in the quiet of his home, with the last box resting nearby, Martin felt something strong and gentle. He felt ready to move forward, with memory, with hope, and with the art of letting go. Chapter 7. Resolution. The yard sale was over. The garden was quiet again, and the tables had been folded and stored away. Only a few boxes remained inside the house, neatly stacked in the hallway. Martin Ellis stood by the window, looking out at the street. The air was fresh, and the light coming through the glass felt softer than before. Something in the house had changed. It was not just the space, it was the feeling. Martin had kept a few items. The journal, the watch, the scarf, and a handful of photographs were placed carefully in his study. They were not hidden. They were part of his life, reminders of love and time. The rest had gone to new homes. Books, dishes, toys, and decorations had found new hands, new stories. Martin didn't feel loss. He felt relief. The rooms felt lighter. The shelves were no longer crowded. The corners were no longer filled with unopened boxes. The house breathed again. Martin walked through each room slowly, noticing how the light moved across the walls, how the air felt easier to carry. He didn't feel alone. He felt present. Inspired by Margaret's journal, Martin began to write. He opened a fresh notebook and started with simple memories. He wrote about their first home, their travels, their quiet evenings reading together. He wrote about teaching, about students who had asked questions that stayed with him. He didn't try to be perfect. He just wanted to remember. Writing became part of his routine. Each morning, after tea, he sat at his desk and added a few lines. Some days he wrote about joy. Other days he wrote about silence. He didn't rush. He let the words come naturally. The journal had shown him that memory could be gentle, and he wanted his own to be the same. Martin also began walking more. He explored the streets of Bath, noticing things he hadn't seen in years. He passed the old bookshop, the bakery with the warm windows, the park where he and Margaret had once sat on a bench under a tree. He greeted neighbors, some of whom he hadn't spoken to in a long time. He asked about their gardens, their families, their pets. He listened more than he spoke. One afternoon, he joined a small group at the local library. They met once a week to share stories and talk about books. Martin didn't speak much at first, but he enjoyed being there. He liked hearing different voices, different lives. He brought a few of his own stories, and people listened. Some asked questions. Some smiled. He felt connected. Letting go had not been easy. It had taken time, thought, and courage. But Martin now understood that it was not rejection. It was transition. It was a way to honor the past without being held by it. He had not erased Margaret's memory. He had made space for it to live in a new way. He looked at the box in his study, the one with the watch, the scarf, and the note. He didn't open it every day. But he knew it was there. It was not a weight. It was a part of him. And that was enough. Martin Ellis had lived a quiet life, full of books, thoughts, and love. He had lost, but he had also grown. He had learned that memory is not just in objects. It is in the heart, in the way we speak, in the way we walk, in the way we choose to live. And so, in the quiet city of Bath, in a house that now felt open and warm, Martin continued his days with peace. He wrote, he walked, he listened. He carried memory not as a burden, but as a gift. Moral: letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means making space for life. Objects carry memory, but true memory lives in the heart. We can carry it forward, even when the object stays behind. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.